Good afternoon. My name is Mārtiņš Vargulis, and I'm a researcher at Latvian Institute of International Affairs. And on the behalf of Latvian Institute of International Affairs, I'm delighted to be the moderator of the next episode of the Talk series. During this Talk series, we are aiming to provide a platform for discussion on challenges, implications, perspectives for the Baltic States in the context of the new US administration. This particular episode we will be devoting to the security, and I'm pleased to have General Ben Hodges with us today. Ben Hodges is retired Lieutenant General who has had a long-standing, high-level military career in US Army. And he was officer as a Commander General, United States Army Europe. And now, currently, he is the Pershing Chair in the Strategic Studies at the Center for European Policy Analysis. So, General Hodges, it's a pleasure to have you here. And I'm more than sure that with your knowledge, experience, and openness, we will have a frank and thought-provoking discussion.
Martin, thank you very much for the privilege to participate in this. I'm really grateful for that.
Thank you for joining us today. If I may, before going to the future developments, I would like to go back to the previous administration, and I would appreciate your thoughts on the legacy of the Trump administration. From security perspective, what is the post-Trump era? What consequences and what challenges are lying ahead for the Biden administration from your perspective?
So I think probably three things. First of all, the previous administration certainly raised awareness of things that our alliance needed to do. But at the same time, it caused damage. The approach, the uncertainty about American commitment to NATO, it was abusive language almost in public with some of our most important allies. I think probably damaged the cohesion of NATO a little bit. And I'm sure all of your listeners know that the cohesion of NATO is ultimately the best guarantee of effective deterrence. And so while some nations may have increased defense spending because of the way the president did it, I don't actually think that was the motivation. The key is protecting the cohesion of the alliance, and for all of our allies, as well as the Kremlin, then convinced that the United States is committed. And so that's the mission for the new administration. I think President Biden made that very clear last week when he spoke at the special edition of Munich Security Conference. And Secretary of Defense Austin has made this very clear both in his first day on the job in the Pentagon and at the recent defense ministerials that the United States is committed to NATO, as should have removed all doubt.
Exactly. There have been both critics and support for the various policies and approaches implemented by Trump administration. One of those, and you already touched upon, was the defense spending. One of the arguments, supportive arguments for the Trump administration was that he stimulated the increase of the defense spending by European allies. And we see in the real numbers, it really was the case. Overall, and taking into the amount that has been increased and in the defense spending, how alliance has evolved, how it helped to strengthen particular capabilities, how we use those the money allocated for defense wisely.
So Look, the idea or the importance of burden sharing, that issue has been out there since President Truman was the American president. So this is always going to be a topic, and it's fair for it to be a topic. But I think that it's important to keep in mind that the alliance, that members began to increase defense spending going back to 2014 after the Wales summit. And so, who deserves credit for it going up is less important than are we in fact increasing our capability and our capacity, and are we improving the readiness of our forces as well as the readiness, the resilience of our societies. That's what's really most important in my view. And I think Secretary General Stoltenberg deserves a lot of credit for keeping the alliance together. But also the leaders in each of the nations, and certainly in Latvia and your neighbors in Estonia and Lithuania, where you wake up every morning and the bear is right there, and you have historical reasons to want to be prepared. I think that's what is most important. Now, there are several things that the alliance can do better. I think that the 2%, maybe we could be a little bit more sophisticated about what 2% means. I am not in favor of getting rid of the 2% because that would be an admission of failure if we say, okay, it was just too hard. Germany's never going to get there. Canada's never going to get there. The Netherlands or Norway will never get there. I think it's important to have a clear standard, but that's not the only standard. And I also don't agree with some proposals I've heard that you could add in foreign aid or development, things like that. I think that waters down the real intention of investing in defense. For sure, priority number 1, priority number 2, and priority 3 should always be the readiness of what you have now. So the women and men that serve in Latvia's armed forces, for example, they should have the best possible equipment. They should be well trained, and all of the formations should be full. So to be ready to do their job, that's the number one responsibility, I think, of the political leadership of each country, whether it's Latvia or the United States or Germany or whoever. Secondly, each nation has responsibilities for its own defense, and I think investment in cyber protection, for example, of critical infrastructure, including transportation infrastructure, your power generation infrastructure, that ought to count, because everybody acknowledges that we got to prepare for the next war, not the last war, and everybody acknowledges that the next war is going to include cyber strikes. I mean, in fact, all of us have already suffered from cyber strikes already. So then it makes sense that investment in protecting everything from cyber is the same in my mind as missile defense or engineers or tanks or artillery or whatever. So I think we could be more sophisticated in that regard. And then we think about what is Germany's role in the alliance? I mean, you're talking about it's the leading economic power in Europe. It has a large Bundeswehr, but we don't need more Bundeswehr. But Germany has an important role to play as the logistics hub for NATO, as a transit hub to enable rapid reinforcement. So perhaps in that role, we need more German trains, not more German tanks. So is there a way to invest money in transport capability that helps the alliance move quickly so that we can prevent a crisis from ever happening? And I think the speed of movement is just as important as the size of whatever forces are there to convey to the Kremlin that we can move as fast or faster than Russian Federation forces so that they don't make a terrible miscalculation that they might be able to launch some sort of attack into Latvia, for example, or into Lithuania to cut that Suwalki corridor and then hold us hostage.
Thank you, General, for insights and sort of say military perspective. Fully subscribe what you just said. Still, on the broader perspective, you already touched upon on the consequences from the previous administration and Biden's Munich speech. One of the broader implications of Trump's approach was the emerging discussion on European strategic autonomy, right? Including also developing, strengthening their own military capabilities, forces, going up to discussion to European army. From your perspective, from your reading, how these dynamics could further evolve within the context of new administration, and taking also account what you said, the changes, the dynamics internal dynamics in Germany and of course France as well.
So, you know, this notion of strategic autonomy to me is a big false argument. The United States has always wanted our European allies to do more. The United States cannot stop France, for example. We can't prevent France from doing anything. So this continuous harping about we need to have European strategic, you have it. I mean, these are sovereign countries, and the European Union gives a framework for economic strategic autonomy. The United States is not the brake on what France might want to do in Africa, for example. Interestingly, let's just say that tomorrow morning, all the leaders of Europe woke up and said, all right, we're going to have a European army, all right, which they could do. That will not increase spending by €1. I mean, that having a European army will not increase spending. Secondly, the French the French and the Dutch are the oldest allies of America since our revolution, and they've been a great ally. But for all the talk of strategic autonomy, the French could not do operations in the Sahel without American logistical support and intelligence support. So we're not standing in the way of this idea of autonomy. What I really believe this is about protecting European defense industry. Of what the United States wants is to be able to compete. And so to kind of put autonomy, or to use the framework of strategic autonomy, I think is not entirely honest. And I have not met too many military leaders in countries outside of France, to be candid, that are in favor of a European army or that seek this sort of autonomy. Now, the United States, I think we bear some responsibility for this because we allowed there to be doubt whether or not the United States was committed. I'm sure there have been times where our efforts for our defense industry to want to compete inside Europe has come across as in a way that is annoying or irritating to others. I think that what we really want is to be able to compete in the defense industry as well as in communications or in other telecommunications industries as well. At the end of the day, you know, the women and men in our armed forces deserve to have the best equipment. Whatever Latvia chooses, whatever Poland chooses, whatever Germany chooses. But of course, it's completely normal that a nation is going to protect its defense industry as much as it can because there are so many jobs associated with it, as well as to a degree for self-reliance. Now, I think the new administration has made it clear, again, a commitment to NATO. Number two, that the administration wants to work with the European Union in a way that's significantly different from the previous administration. That we don't see the EU as the enemy. It's an economic competitor, but also an economic partner, and it's also a diplomatic partner. When the president talks about the long-term strategic challenges, of course, China represents that largest long-term strategic challenge for the United States and frankly for all of us. And so there's a recognition that we've got to work closely with our European allies and friends in the diplomatic domain and the economic domain, as well as in the military domain, so that we can compete more effectively with what China does with its illegal technology thefts, its lack of transparency, government money, the creation of debt traps, these kinds of things. This is not about making Europeans choose between China or the United States. This is about the United States realizing we've got to work closely with our partners and allies. Finally, the new administration has acknowledged and will continue to act this way, that we don't have the capacity. I think Secretary Austin said it almost exactly like this. We don't have the capacity to do everything that we have to do by ourselves to contain or deter Chinese aggression, to deter the Kremlin, to contain Iran, to protect the global commons that everybody depends on, that the U.S. has always helped protect, and deal with all the other issues that are out there, fighting Islamic extremism. We can't do it by ourselves. We need allies. And it's becoming increasingly clear that we need a strong European pillar, not a European pillow, to continue to deter Russia, the Kremlin, if we become fixed in the Indo-Pacific region.
Probably one of the best deterrence messages is to have force allied troops on our soil. And one of those discussions also in the previous administration, and we see with the new administration, it has changed. I mean, U.S. troop presence in Europe. From your perspective, should U.S. increase troop presence in Europe? And follow up to this one, troop presence in the Baltic region. We know that U.S. A lot of troops are stationed in Poland. How about Baltics? You already mentioned this A2AD scenario, importance of Suwalki corridor, and to have troops on this side of Suwalki. Can you please elaborate on this one?
Yeah, sure. So after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the United States quickly deployed some soldiers to Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland at the invitation of our allies to demonstrate both to our allies, to provide assurance to our allies, but also to the Kremlin that, look, we're going to protect our allies. And the clearest signal of that is putting American soldiers on the ground, literally boots on the ground. So that was exactly the right step to take in those early days. Now, as the alliance reacted, and I think what we saw coming out of the NATO summit in Warsaw, I mean, very fast action to deploy enhanced forward presence battle groups, for example, to the British-led in Estonia, the Canadian-led battle group in Latvia, the German-led battle group in Lithuania, and then the American-led battle group in Poland. I think that was the next correct step because, again, yes, American presence is significant. There's no denying that. And I want there to be American presence in every country along NATO's eastern flank. But I think it's also important that the alliance is present and in a cohesive way. So it made sense to me that once the battle groups were deployed, and now you've got flags from almost every NATO country are in the Baltic states. That is such a powerful representation of commitment that you've got soldiers from Southern Europe as well, not just Central and Eastern Europe. So that was powerful enough to me that I thought, okay, we don't need to have so many American soldiers in each of these countries, because partly there's a capacity. I mean, how much training area do you have to maintain a level of readiness, and also for allies to trust NATO, to put trust in the alliance. So I thought that was very important. Still, in Lielvārda, we have an American aviation unit that's there all the time. We have an American logistics unit in Lithuania. It's not many, but there are American soldiers that are there all the time. What I would prefer to see, when what we really need are what we call enablers, logistics, transport, communications, intelligence infrastructure. That sort of framework from Estonia to Bulgaria, all the way through, because that's the slowest to move. The fastest things to move are the infantry, the armor, and so on. It's the other stuff, getting that in place, and air defense, by the way. That's what takes the most time. So I would like to see that increased in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, as well as Bulgaria. Poland and Romania, of course, are where most of the ground troops are already located. I would also like to see pre-position of ammunition, of stocks that would be needed, because this stuff it's hard to move. It's slow and hard to move. Now, there's some risk when you do that. You could lose it in a strike, but I think that would accelerate the speed with which we move. Another thing that we really need to do is, I think, improve the intelligence sharing in the region. People in Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland will know more about what's happening in Russia than any American will ever know, because of proximity. If there's a crisis, it won't be an American satellite that determines it's happening. It's going to be somebody on the ground that's reading and watching, and it probably won't even be a military person. It'll be somebody else that sees and feels that. That's what we've got to get to. So that's not Five Eyes. I mean, this is outside of Five Eyes. So if I could encapsulate this in a simple framework of what's needed, it's all about speed of recognition, speed of decision, and speed of assembly. Okay, speed of recognition, something's happening. So then decision makers at every level can start taking steps to start movement. And that's how we prevent the crisis. Those are the kind of things that are needed in Baltic countries.
Definitely right. Definitely rightly pointed that as a frontline states, as a neighboring countries, we fully understand what's going on along our border, and we see we observe high-level military activities, we see the ambition, we saw what happened in Ukraine, Georgia, and so on and so forth. And therefore, Kremlin respects strength and power, and the US can be the one who can really provide different kind of stimulus and impact to overall regional balance, right? But from the Baltic perspective, and taking into account your experience and knowing the region, from your perspective, what should Baltic states do? I mean, what are the critical aspects to be developed in the next following years, and in cooperation maybe with the US and new administration?
So a couple of things. First of all, continue doing what you're doing now of making yourself indigestible. All right, the Finns, candidly, are probably the best in in the region of making themselves indigestible, excuse me. It's you don't have enough population and resources to maintain a large enough force to be on defense all the time. It's just not feasible. So you have to make yourself that it would be so painful for Russian forces to come in there in any form that they don't want to do that, or else it would take so long that at least you're buying time now for your friends and allies to arrive. So that's not just military, that's the whole of society. That's about making people take ownership of this. It's also about hardening infrastructure. I've talked about cyber already, protecting energy, those kind of things. That's number one. Number two, and I will be candid, I don't know that Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania cooperate with each other as well as they should. I think there's competition in a variety of different things. And look, I'm not naive. You're talking about 3 different histories, 3 different languages, 3 different ethnicities almost. I mean, that are, even though in the West, we tend to say the 3 Bs, the Baltic States, as if they're like Georgia, Florida, and Alabama, it's all just kind of the same. And it's not. And I didn't realize that until I had the chance to serve with soldiers from all those countries and spend so much time in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, the differences. And I think more cooperation is needed to help each other. And what I saw recently from the Estonian Chief of Defense, the idea of creating a 360-degree sort of bubble around Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, where they're literally interlocking fires, we would call it, where if Estonia was attacked, that Latvia would have the capability to be able to hit targets inside Estonia to protect Estonia. That sort of cooperation, I think, is exactly what is needed. Look, it's each nation's choice to purchase whatever equipment they want to have, or weapon systems, or whatever. And you always have to make tough choices because there's always competition for budget. But the more places where you could cooperate and have the same, whether we're talking about vehicles or air defense or those kinds of capabilities, it's more efficient, frankly, when you can cooperate. Also, I would say the air defense, air and missile defense. Lithuania has purchased the NASAMS, for example. I think Estonia and Latvia need to figure out what they can afford in terms of air and missile defense to protect the civilian population as well as critical infrastructure. Germany and the Netherlands should take on the responsibility for the higher altitude air and missile defense. To me, this is another form of burden sharing. Is to take on that. Poland is increasing its air and missile defense capability, but it's got a lot to do to protect itself. I think Germany should take on a leading role to help provide this air and missile defense over Baltic countries. The last recommendation I'd make is the part of this 360-degree bubble that the Estonian Chief of Defense talked about, out into the Baltic Sea itself. It's not realistic to expect Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania to have a large navy. It's not feasible. It can't afford it. It's not what's needed. It is needed to have the ability to detect, prevent Russian submarines from operating inside your waters, to detect and deactivate underwater mines, for example. So having a maritime component to this 360-degree bubble is important, and there are a lot of unmanned systems that are becoming available now. This The U.S. Navy is putting a lot of money into this. All the navies of NATO are doing this. Most of them are. I would recommend, and I'm an Army infantry soldier, so this is new to me. But the more I study it, the more I realize this is something that's affordable. And I keep looking at my map, and I said, wow, wouldn't it be great if Estonia and Latvia, for example, were to combine resources to conduct anti-submarine war capabilities and anti-mine capabilities. Be much more affordable that way.
Well, thank you for this kind of critical but also realistic thoughts on Baltic cooperation. Definitely, it's costly, but we cannot do by ourselves alone. But there is a place for and room for transatlantic cooperation, especially when it comes to the common procurement. But to conclude, on the broader perspective, on the arms control, arms regimes, we know that START has been extended for another 5 years, but several other regimes like Vienna Document, INF, Open Skies Treaty have lost their relevance. Are we back in the arms race? And taking into account Biden's approach, knowing his policy, security policy, what's your vision? How this particular dynamics will evolve?
Well, I have to say I was very happy that the administration was able to get an extension on the New START. I think that's important for a couple reasons. One, it does help provide some control, but it also sends a signal that the United States is not just about military force, but that we also are interested in arms control. And I think that was an important signal to our European allies that that this is important and that we want to get back into that. But there's a reason that the Trump administration walked away from so many of these other protocols. I wish they hadn't. I thought those were mistakes, but there is a reason to it. It's because they all had problems. Especially the fact that the Russian Federation did not comply. They violated every one of these things over and over. And to be candid, most of our European allies knew that the Kremlin was doing this, and yet there was no pressure on the Kremlin to live up to it. And I'm talking especially from Germany and France. Those are the two countries that probably have the most leverage on the Kremlin, and they didn't use it to cause the Kremlin to live up to their obligations. And so that's why the Trump administration chose to walk away. Again, I think that's the wrong approach. I think we're much better leading rather than leaving these kinds of organizations, because they do mean a lot to especially the European allies. So I hope that we'll get back into open skies. The INF treaty, I'm not sure about this. The problem with INF, of course, is not only that the Russians were not compliant, they had been a long time in violation, but the Chinese are a factor. And so we've got to figure out a way to either get the Chinese to participate, and so far they've flat out said no way. They have no desire to participate in something like that unless the United States basically comes down, reduces significantly. So that's part of the challenge, is how do you take into account China and its growth of capabilities. At the end of the day, for any of these arms control mechanisms to work, you've got to have transparency, and there's got to be a strict compliance protocol. And so this is where I think leadership by Germany and France, but also Canada and UK, that can put pressure on the Kremlin to live up to international agreement is going to be very important. And I think that's what the Biden administration is going to do. They're going to work closely with allies and say, look, you have got to put pressure on the Kremlin to act like a responsible member of international community.
Well, great, and great to hear that the new administration will work closely with the European allies in this particular issue. So thank you, General, for indeed, it was a thought-provoking discussion, realistic and very topical issues you just mentioned. For the audience, please stay tuned in for the last episode of this talk series that will be devoted more to the international politics, values, norms related issues. Thank you.